Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If everybody could take their seats, we can go ahead and get started today. We know that the people will be continuing to kind of file in. I've made a decision that some people are not morning people, apparently, but that's okay. So I first want to just start by thanking again our sponsors. First, NIST for providing the facilities for us. By now, you've had a chance to kind of walk through some of the locations. So again, anytime there are going to be breakouts in the conference rooms or lecture rooms E and F, they're downstairs. Just take breadcrumbs with you. But there are signs, and it's easiest to use the stairs versus the elevator because it's less of a walk. We had a great time yesterday in the courtyard, so we got to experience that part too. There were a lot of people that stayed for the social time, so it's always great to kind of get to talk and relax with one another and build relationships because you do a lot of heavy lifting in those committees, and we have some heavy discussions a lot of times. So it's nice to kind of sit back and eat a little barbecue and relax. I also want to thank Dr. First and LexisNexis as our plenary sponsors. I'm going to go over a few things for the agenda and make a few highlights. Yesterday, we had several panels. So we had the Citizen Consumer Panel, and I've heard a lot of feedback about having the chance to hear from the Federation for the Blind and NAACP and ACLU and the types of comments and even potential use cases that they could help us in identifying. And I think that they're going to be more involved in the future. So thanks to Jim Barnett for reaching out and making those relationships, so thank you. We also had the instant pilots share a lot, and so those were kind of like the way that we kind of got started yesterday. Today, we are going to have a lot of breakout sessions. So we're going to start the day all in here, and we did use, we taped off or we roped off the area to kind of make us all kind of sit closer together. I didn't know it was going to be like crime scene tape, though. So, so I was like, oh, okay. But, the goal is some of our activities are going to require you to talk in pairs. So we want to just get you kind of a little closer together. So we might ask some of you to kind of even move even closer later on in the day. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking. If you remember the image that we had, that really busy picture of that map, one of the things that kind of came from that were discussions around value propositions. And we really want to get to a point where we can talk more about how the IDSG has started with our mission and vision statements and how we're driving down to a broader value proposition, but how critically important it is when you think about the panels yesterday and the comments that were made to understand the more personal value propositions that may exist for an individual or an organization. So we're going to spend some time in the morning dealing with that. In the afternoon, we're going to spend more time with our committees. So our committee chairs have decided, and I guess the committee in general, have decided which committees need to do joint sessions. One of the feedback that we had earlier a couple of months ago was that they found value in having a chance for some of the committees to work together at the plenary sessions. You all meet regularly, weekly or every other week in your individual committees, but sometimes there's a lot of value in being able to jointly meet. So on your agenda, you'll see that there are a few different times when there are sessions that you have to do breakouts. There's a birds of feather session that's after you get your food in the cafeteria. Then the 12 to 1 hour is when we're going to actually have the birds of a feather sessions, and we always open this up for anybody that wants to have a chance to maybe talk about a topic that's important to them. It's a much more unstructured approach. So if there's anyone in the room that wants to have a discussion topic that you want to get a few people together, I'd love to hear from you right now so that we can make that available. The only thing that we have currently scheduled during the Birds of a Feather sessions is the Privacy and Trust Framework group are meeting in room E. And the TSCP pilot is going to also have a discussion in room F. And we'll make sure that those are clearly marked for you. But right now, Privacy and Trust Framework in room E during the lunch hour, and the TSCP pilot discussion in room F if you want to find out more about those. So just kind of take a note on that part. Let me see what else is important. When we then, we're going to come back after we have the Birds of a Feather session, and we're going to have another set of breakouts. So on your agenda it says transition to the full plenary room, but actually from 1:15 to 2:15 you see that it says that there is a joint committee breakout session. So you don't really need to come back in here. The joint committees that are meeting, the functional model, which we think that there's going to be a lot of people that want to be a part of that, will be in this auditorium. But if you want to have any other meetings, there's a committee meeting for user experience. Actually, that's going to be at 3:45. But so the only one that's actually scheduled right now is a functional model one in here. And the functional model has such impacts to almost every committee. So I just wanted to make sure that you kind of were aware of that part. Then we'll have committee report outs. So each of the committees will be spending about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about what has been going on in their committee. It'll be a good time that after we finish the functional model and the committee report outs to kind of touch base again on the identity ecosystem framework that we started our conversation last plenary. So we're going to have a little more conversation there, and then we're going to have one more joint committee breakout, and at that time it'll be the Standards and Trust Framework Committee meeting together and the User Experience Committee. And so again, we'll have those clearly marked, and for the remote participants, you'll be able to participate in all of those events as well. So I just want to, again, make sure that you're aware of the fact that there is a board outside. If you have anything that you need to post, there's the bulletin boards for that. Our IPR policy is also available on that same board, so if you need to get a copy of that as well. Were there any other Birds of a Feather sessions for today that anybody would like to bring up? Okay. And there's also going to be an opportunity for Birds of a Feather sessions tomorrow as well. So if you want to just think about the ideas that might be of interest to you, just let us know. And you can also informally, there are some tables in the cafeteria that'll be available for you. So if you just want to even go into the cafeteria and have a few of you get together to have a conversation, we have some tables that are available there too. So at this time, I'd like to transition to a very special guest that we have. Jeremy's going to do the introduction, but it's exciting for us to be able to be in the DC area and get to have a number of people come in and be able to share their ideas. So, Jeremy.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to NIST for day 2 of our Identity Ecosystem Steering Group meeting. So, as Kim was saying, one of the nice things about being here in DC is we can bring in some speakers who are local who we normally couldn't get very easily. Our next speaker is one of those folks. Michael Daniel is Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator for the White House and for the federal government. We talk, a lot about different themes in identity and things that it impacts. Certainly the impact of big data and privacy, how we can enable new innovation online, both in government as well as in the private sector, how identity can provide a foundation for cloud computing to take off. But at its core, at least from the government's perspective, what drove the creation of NSTIC early on was the cybersecurity nexus with identity and the fact that inadequate identity mechanisms are responsible for so many of our cybersecurity problems. So in that regard, I'm really happy that Michael was able to come up here today. He and his office have played a central role in helping to birth NSIC, help make sure it's funded, supported, executed both across the private sector and in the government. Michael's job is to lead interagency development of national cybersecurity strategy and policy, and he oversees agencies' implementations of the policies. A big part of his role is also to ensure that the federal government's effectively partnering with the private sector, other branches of government, and also other nations. Before coming to this current position, he spent 17 years in the White House at the Office of Management and Budget, where, among other things, he was heavily involved in the early machinations of actually getting funding allocated in the president's budget for the NSTIC, something that I am personally quite grateful for. So with that, I'm pleased he could be here today, and let me bring up Michael. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, for that nice introduction. And thanks to everyone for having me here today, and NIST for hosting this event, and Kim, Peter, others for putting your time and energy into chairing various pieces of this and making this conference successful. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about identity, credential, and access management issues. Jeremy read a chunk of the bio. If you're not familiar with Washington, D.C., what that actually makes me is the chief cat herder for cybersecurity in Washington, D.C. But it's a fascinating and interesting job that has a lot of different aspects. And so this morning I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the White House perspective on the cyber threats that we're facing, and how really the identity management issues that you're spending your time on here really factor into our work at the National Security Council level from a strategic point of view. And so while that identity, credential, and access management, ICAM, we're Washington, we've got to have an acronym, while ICAM supports many different missions, privacy, efficiency, information sharing, and cybersecurity, as Jeremy mentioned, I, of course, am particularly focused on the cybersecurity angle. And so as a result, as the cybersecurity coordinator, I'm really the focal point for ICAM policy and strategy on the NSC. Now, of course, in addition to cybersecurity, the White House is very interested in furthering what we call the digital government. That is, enabling more and richer, higher valued government services for citizens and businesses as part of the digital economy. Almost every part of the government can envision either moving current services online or providing new services for citizens and businesses online. If only we could sort out whether that someone who's coming to the website or to that portal online is really who they claim to be. And it's basically impossible to do this without addressing the core issues of identity and interoperability. In short, without identity, digital government simply cannot reach its full potential. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the threat space that we see and the overall trends that, from the White House policy perspective, make the cybersecurity threat so particularly troubling, and why identity management is such a key issue in addressing those. First and foremost, the threat itself is becoming more broader and more diverse. We keep hooking more and more stuff up to the internet, the so-called Internet of Things, making the area that we need to defend bigger almost every day. So if we thought that doing cybersecurity and identity management in a world of wired desktops was hard, now we're going to do it in a mobile environment where your refrigerator and your car and your coffee maker and your watch are a cyber threat vector. And right now, most manufacturers are not embedding strong authentication into the devices and applications that they produce. We've seen more examples than I can really count of products being given to users with a default password set to password, or the ever-popular 123456. And as more and more things in the Internet of Things have a password, this problem is simply going to go worse. And in fact, we've actually seen some examples of products that have come out recently where you can't even change the default password from password. So this is not a good place to be. Second, the threat is becoming more sophisticated. Malware is becoming harder and harder to detect, and it does more and very different kinds of things. The malware manufacturers are getting pretty sophisticated in their thinking. They're embedding drop-down menus and dialog boxes. They're running into the software. Many of the gray companies in this space now run 24/7 help desks. So if your malware isn't working properly, you can call them up and they'll help you out. So spear phishing attacks in this space are becoming particularly sophisticated in their ability to mimic legitimate traffic, and it becomes almost impossible for a human to sort them out. And many of those spear phishing attacks are dedicated to stealing passwords and other kinds of credentials so that the intruders can move through the network more easily, appear more like legitimate traffic. And we're seeing an increasing number of incidents of cybercrime where user passwords are the particular target of that theft for other reasons. And then lastly, the threat is becoming more dangerous. Malicious actors are showing an increasing willingness to be more destructive in their activities, as we have witnessed over the past couple of years with the attacks on things like Saudi Aramco in 2012, the South Korean banks last year, and even the Las Vegas Sands Casino here in the United States this year. So what used to be the digital equivalent of graffiti has moved up the threat spectrum into the destructive space. But what's particularly concerning about all three of these trends is how normal they're becoming. These threats are essentially leading to a new normal of persistent intrusions, violations of privacy, thefts of business information, and degradation and denial of service on the internet. And we're seeing these threats manifest in multiple ways. The potential for attacks on our critical infrastructure, cyber-enabled economic espionage, efforts to censor and constrain the global internet itself, and as well as traditional espionage. So weak identity and credential management practices represent a commonly exploited vector for attack across all of these threats. And it's one of these interesting situations where everybody knows that the passwords are terrible, and yet they remain the most prevalent security method we have. You can pick your statistics. It's been widely reported that 3/4 of network intrusions, 80%, some really ridiculously high number of intrusions, though, are executed through the exploitation of weak or stolen credentials. Consequently, we are seeing an increasing number of widely publicized cybersecurity incidents specifically related to passwords. In April, the Government Accountability Office reported that the number of data breaches in government has more than doubled since 2009. And many of those breaches have been focused on stealing the personally identifiable information of people who are customers of government programs. Of course, inside the federal government, we've had WikiLeaks and last year's unauthorized disclosures, both of which were enabled by inconsistent identity management practices. And the most public example I can point to, of course, is the Heartbleed bug that's been playing out over the past few months. In response to that, users, of course, were directed to change all of their passwords because they may have been decrypted and exposed to hackers on sites that use OpenSSL. Being directed to change all their passwords has served to highlight for users just what a daunting task that is, because there are usually so many of them. Or, if you're using really poor security practices, you've used the same one over and over again across multiple websites, which puts you even more at risk. All of these examples underscore the urgent need for a secure, robust identity ecosystem, the thing that you're here working on, both internally for the federal government and more broadly for the public, that does not rely on weak usernames and passwords. So in my mind, ICAM is one of those foundational capabilities that underpins a whole bunch of missions that we pursue. It is fundamental to cybersecurity, and at the same time, it is key to protecting privacy, as well as actually enabling efficient information sharing. And as I mentioned earlier, ICAM, or rather the lack of it, really is the key reason we're not able to offer more and richer government services online. But as usual, this problem is a complex one. We've been working on it for the past decade, and we still have a long way to go. There are a couple of reasons for this that you can think of. One of which, of course, is that there are multiple steps to getting interoperable identity management going. And those steps are not necessarily sequential. And so as a result, organizations often have trouble figuring out which steps to do in which order. It seems like everyone in the federal government, at least, is in a slightly different place as a result of that in terms of their progress, and it means that it's difficult for them to cooperate and collaborate in this area. And different parts of the federal government have been taking different approaches on their classified systems versus their unclassified systems versus their public-facing systems versus their internal-facing systems. And success in this space involves coordinating a lot of different organizational missions within the federal government, both on a technical but also at the policy, physical security, procurement, budgeting, and more. And getting to done in this space is not cheap. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of dollars, although you can certainly spend some money in this area. But I mean in terms of leadership attention and leadership time and focus. And that's one of the most valuable commodities that we actually have in Washington. And it's one of those issues that we clearly are not going to be able to spend our way out of, particularly in the current budget environment. So we have to look for opportunities to share services and do things like leverage commonly accepted credentials among agencies, even with external partners, to save the cost of re-credentialing the same user multiple times. So the importance, complexity, and difficulty of the identity problem space is why I'm here. And this issue is fundamental for our national and economic security, for the federal government and as a society that lives an ever-growing proportion of our lives online. And as a result, the White House is very much concerned with driving results in this space. So what are we doing about it? Well, clearly one of our big priorities, and where we think there is a major role for the private sector to play, is in the President's National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, NSTIC. All of you are very, very familiar with that work, but it's one that I promote quite frequently in a lot of my talks that I give and when I'm out talking to other pieces of the private sector or the federal government. And really, sort of explaining that what we're trying to do is to create a private, is to catalyze the private sector to produce a marketplace, an identity ecosystem, where Americans can actually choose from a variety of new types of identity and authentication solutions to use instead of passwords. That's a new thing still for many people. So it's one that I'm very keen on promoting. In fact, I often say that one of my key goals in my job that I would really love to be able to do is to kill the password dead. And if we're serious about closing off the most commonly exploited attack vectors, we simply have to start with a password. And the only way to do that is to actually have that marketplace that I mentioned of stronger authentication technologies that consumers and businesses can easily use and trust. So beyond the weaknesses of passwords, though, there are a lot of transactions that are not online today in both government and the private sector because there's no easy way to formally confirm identities. And so obviously the goal here is not just to replace the password, but it's also to create a marketplace where the market itself drives the continual update of authentication technologies as better methods come along. Since, of course, to overuse that cliche about cybersecurity, the one constant is change. And our expectation has to be that the technologies we've deployed today will not be the technologies that we need tomorrow. So therefore, we need to make sure that what we are deploying is modular and standards-based so our solutions can evolve as rapidly as our adversaries' attacks are evolving. And in the NSTIC, the President has challenged the private sector to create solutions to address this problem. NSTIC seeks not only to address this problem through new technologies, but also by directly tackling the barriers that has inhibited the marketplace to date. Interoperability, liability, usability, and privacy among them. So the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group that's meeting here today is a key part of addressing those barriers and working to create that framework of standards and policies that can underpin that ecosystem. So not only is NSTIC a great example of a way that we can make cyberspace inherently more secure, it's an example of the kind of strong public-private partnership that we in the federal government really want to promote. And it's the projects that all of you are piloting under NSTIC that are starting to come to fruition. These are not vaporware. These are real workable solutions that are emerging, and this represents a real opportunity for the federal government and society to make progress on a really hard problem. So on the federal side, my top priority under NSTIC is implementing the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange. So here we get to an embedded acronym, which we refer to as F6, FCCX. So the goal of F6 sounds relatively simple: to allow citizens to access services across multiple federal agencies without having to go through account creation, identity vetting, and credential issuance at each different agency. In simple terms, someone who is a veteran, a college student, and a taxpayer ought to be able to use the same credential to access services at the VA, federal student aid, and the IRS. But of course, this is Washington, so actually making that simple idea a reality is not quite so simple. It's quite the challenge. And so as my top priority for the federal ICAM space, F6 is being actively supported by my office, and I'm pleased to note that GSA, the Postal Service, NIST, and other partners are making progress against that goal. Internally within the federal government, we are working to shore up the strategic management of ICAM. We are doing this by driving strong program management techniques through all the different federal networks, and we're driving towards federal-wide solutions. At the strategic level, we are working on developing and linking the key aspects of the federal management of identity, including developing a federal-wide implementation strategy across all the different classification domains that we have, coordinating federal-wide governance among senior leaders, and setting government-wide priorities, defining the metrics against how we're going to measure our progress, for example, working through the Office of Management and Budget's cross-agency priority goal process and FSMA, including baselines and specific priority goals, aligning the resources to those CAP goals and progress metrics, and then identifying and addressing policy gaps and mandates. We've been actively working to position ourselves to drive progress on ICAM, and I think we're beginning to see some traction. I'm confident that you will see results coming from the many efforts that I've highlighted here today. So I think as this group transitions to an independent organization, you too will have to face the hard challenges of setting and getting agreements on priorities, connecting your efforts with others in the identity space, developing and maintaining a sense of urgency for the projects, and marketing solutions to a broad audience that includes senior leaders all the way down to individual users. Yours is not really a technical challenge. It's really a challenge of economics, human psychology, and management. I know, because we face the same issues in accelerating progress in identity management within the federal government. So I think you're on track to make progress in this space in the development of your framework that I've been hearing about. As I'm sure most of you are aware, we have adopted a framework approach in implementing the President's executive order on cybersecurity. The NIST cybersecurity framework of standards and best practices that was released in February really has a couple of key aspects to it that I think are very important, that can also serve as a model potentially in this space. One is that the framework itself is very deeply rooted in how businesses actually think about risk. The framework was really built by industry, using industry best practices and standards. And so as a result, it is firmly grounded in how a business actually thinks about its cybersecurity. No organization is going to spend an infinite amount of money on cybersecurity. They're going to make an allocation based on the risk that they face. It also, the cybersecurity framework serves as a common lexicon. It provides a common vocabulary to enable a CIO or a CISO to actually communicate with their chief executive officer, or within the federal government with a deputy secretary or a secretary. And it opens up new lines of communication that we haven't had before. It also enables communication across agencies and between the government and the private sector, and within private sector suppliers and vendors. The framework itself is flexible. It's designed to be updated. It's designed to be customizable for different sectors. And what I would say lastly is really the framework doesn't actually tell you how to do cybersecurity. It provides a tool for structured thinking about cybersecurity, which as I look at the identity space is one of the key problems, which is how do you actually get your arms around the problem? How do you actually provide some structured thinking for it? So I think the idea of taking some of the lessons learned, the practical lessons learned from the cybersecurity framework and brought into the identity space, there's some great potential there to make some progress. Identity management is truly a community-wide effort, and I'm pleased to see so many folks here today that are actively engaged in this subject. And from my perspective, it's one of the foundational keys to making us all safer and more secure, and enabling a lot more to happen inside cyberspace. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Daniel, for sharing those comments with us and kind of setting the stage for the rest of the day. Um, it is definitely something that has great impact. Excuse me, challenge with my sickness right now. Sorry about that. It's definitely an important effort that we are going to spend the rest of the day just really kind of rolling our sleeves up and starting to dig into the different aspects that can really make our framework come to life and be meaningful in the deliverables that we have all of our committees focused on. And so the way that we're going to start the rest of the morning is really digging into the whole value proposition aspects. And we asked Adam Madlin and Jim Barnett. Sorry, I keep telling y'all I'm sick. So we asked Adam Madlin and Jim Barnett to really kind of help us in some of the value proposition activities. As you may recall, Jim was part of the communications subgroup that we had from the Management Council. So he was really actively involved in trying to help us in getting the value proposition foundation set by really working on the mission and vision statements. Adam is actively involved in a lot of different committees, and some of you may have been on a number of email threads where there were a lot of discussions, very interesting feedback around value propositions and what individuals thought we should really be focusing on. And so Adam took on the challenge of trying to synthesize all of these emails that started almost back in December around discussions around value propositions, because we take seriously all of the comments that are made, and it's amazing how even in an informal setting, like an email distribution, there's some really valuable thoughts are shared. So we took the time to make that consolidation, and so we're going to start with a presentation from the two to kind of set the stage, and then we're really going to ask you to think closely about those value props from a much more micro level. So I'm going to pass it to you guys.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everybody. So while we get the presentation up, it'll be just a few moments. I'll try and set the stage a little bit. So I'm Adam Madlin. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the chair of the Security Committee. I am also a member of the IDSG Management Council, and I've been participating in a number of different committees: security, trust framework, standards, use case, and others. And it's allowed me to create or develop a very interesting perspective. And I'm actually quite happy to be kicking off the series of sessions today that I think are very, very important and potentially will help us overcome some challenges that are impacting our ability to be productive. And so I'm excited to kick us off today. So what Jim and I are going to do this morning is really set the stage for a number of sessions that follow on the value prop workshop that is going to immediately follow this. And in fact, it's also going to, I believe, have implications on some sessions this afternoon, the framework plan. And I think the work that we're hoping to accomplish this morning will have, be very valuable across the board. So what we're going to really do is set the stage for the workshop. I'm going to, as Kim mentioned, review a little bit of what we've accomplished in the area of value proposition, the IDSG value proposition so far, and also try and summarize for the plenary, the dialogue that's been going on for actually, quite a number of months. Pretty wide-ranging discussion on the listservs, and to try and make some sense of that and how it can, what it means and help bring it to the plenary so we can influence, the work we need to do. So while we're waiting for the presentation to load, I just want to remind everybody this. I really believe that this is important work. This is, there are some challenges that we're all facing. Those that are, actively involved on a weekly basis should be pretty familiar with the challenges around that we're trying to overcome around, what we're really trying to accomplish and how's the best way to accomplish it and how to collaborate most effectively across the committees. And, this is an important piece of helping us to overcome that. So for us to be successful, we need a lot of participation. So, this might not be the best venue to enable that, but I really encourage everybody that now's your opportunity to impact the direction of the IDSG, to have a say, and it's important that we hear from you this morning on this topic. So.
We can talk about the sort of categories maybe. That might just review that. I mean, I got that.
So we're just dealing with a little technical difficulty. I can jump into it, or you want to talk about the?
I was thinking about this slide you talked to.
Yeah. So sure, we'll circle around a few times on this. Again, it's all important. Starting back in beginning of the year, there was a dialogue, and there was dozens and dozens of emails that were sent on the topic of the IDSG value proposition, and it really ranged an incredible breadth of aspects of it. And so we did go through all of it, or all that we found, and that we participated in, and attempted to summarize it, boil it up, be able to report back to the plenary so that it can influence the work that we're doing. Okay, so to start off, we just want to remind everyone of wisdom from a well-known realist, Nietzsche. The most common form of human stupidity is forgetting what we're trying to do. So that's one of the things we're going to try and address today. And before we get into it, as I was sort of saying, I want to just reiterate, this is important to everything that the IDSG is doing. And I think, in the committees and the conversations that I've participated in, there's questions about what are we really trying to accomplish, both in the short term and the long term. And this is a key part of it. So, it's, important for us to be able to, first internalize the value proposition for the IDSG, to be able to communicate it, where those that are going to have to convince others to get involved and why it's important. And we're trying to set the stage for that with this conversation. I wanted to add one thing. I'm going to review what's been done and discuss the dialogue that was out there, and then Jim's going to come on and share some I think very important and a little bit late-breaking market intelligence and how that might impact our thinking around the value proposition. And so that's what we're going to undertake this morning for the next few minutes. Again, it should be interactive, so we're going to go through a fairly brief presentation, and then we encourage you to interact with us and provide feedback. So just to remind everybody, what we're really trying to do is to develop a value prop or value propositions that clearly articulate the value of the IDSG over other solutions out in the marketplace. And to have an effective value proposition, it needs to clearly specifically state the value that we bring. It needs to show why it's relevant to the target audience, how it's measured, and how to verify that value. So just to ground everybody on what we're trying to accomplish here. The good news is we've made a lot of progress. We understand the mission of the organization as is shown here, the vision of the world, the identity world that we envision. So we're in a very good, we believe, good position from those perspectives. We last fall developed the mission, the vision, and an attempt at the value proposition through a very inclusive thorough process, and but we also learned that the value proposition that we put forth just didn't cut it. People didn't believe it, and that it needed more work, and so that's why we're here today. So, what's all the talk about? We've, there were literally dozens and dozens of emails that we parsed through to try and analyze, summarize, and boil up, and how it would influence these conversations. And we felt that it mostly boiled up into three categories, as we show here. This is not 100% inclusive of all the dialogue, but a very good, we believe, representation. It falls into these three categories. Existential angst. Who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? Should we be leading the market, or should we be following the market? In leading the market, should we build an ecosystem from scratch? Or should we form a loose federation that we, around existing frameworks, and that we can agree on the requirements for those? It also, a lot of conversation in the categories of carrots versus sticks. Should we be in the business of enforcing these principles? Is it possible through a system of trust marks? Or should we just showcase the benefits and let the market decide, essentially? And then finally, the competition. And the challenge is creating a value proposition where we're competing against, quote, free solutions. How do we put forth an appropriate value proposition in that situation that we all know we're facing? And so, here is just a set of sample comments to give you a little feel of the discussion out there. I'm not going to go through them, but just want to highlight that it's quite range of the conversations, and many levels of conversations, from very specific to very high level. But what that has done is help to frame a number of key questions that we feel we need to address. Who is our customer? What exactly are they hiring us to do? At what level should the value proposition be relevant, or propositions? Is the IDSG value the same or different from its products? How does the IDSG quantify its value and success? Is that the same or different question than how do we keep the lights on? So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jim, who will take it from here.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to build on what Adam has talked about by giving you sort of a framework in which to view the ongoing discussion. And to do that, we're going to build out a slightly different perspective than what we're used to discussing in this group. It's going to be a decidedly relying party viewpoint, since that's what I am representing here as a relying party. And as we all know, there's no party like a relying party. It always gets a laugh. I love it. So anyway, just sort of look ahead a little bit. We're gonna talk about the history. We need to know where this all started to know where we're going, and also look at the evolution really of the current market leaders and what is their value proposition, and then look at what they've been doing recently. This is the market intelligence that Adam referred to, and in our, the best light, it is really affirming what we're doing here. So we're going to go through that just a little bit. So let's turn back the clock a little bit and look at the beginning of time, at least as it relates to digital identity. If we think about value in terms of the 4 NSTIC principles, interoperability, cost effectiveness, privacy enhancement, and security, for most of the history of digital identity, the value proposition was really about privacy and security. But that began to change in the 1990s. As we began to see the rise of the commercial internet, the value proposition began to shift. The internet opened up once closed systems to digital strangers, and interoperability became paramount. The username and password combination that had guarded privacy and security suddenly became the shortest path to providing interoperability. And it was free. There was really no cost to registering. So fast forward 15 years to 2008, And we see that the rise of social media have created an infrastructure for a more convenient single sign-on, a social login, that also can meet the expectations set by the username and password convention, that it will be free of cost. So we're going to come to 2010 now. So with the deployment of social login, we see another key turning point in the evolution of digital identity and the value proposition. So this blue space here, it really represents the universe of consumer-facing single sign-ons. It's just sort of like a Venn diagram here a little bit. So just sort of picture that. Interoperability and cost effectiveness are baked into this system. But the pendulum has swung entirely the other direction with regard to security and privacy enhancement, the values that we began with back in 1961, at least for the consumer-facing, market-leading solutions we have now. And so that move, that swing, really gave rise to statements such as this from Mark Zuckerberg back in 2010. This quote, by the way, has been famously misinterpreted as saying that privacy is dead. He never actually said that, but what he's saying here is very important. He's saying that social norms have evolved to the point where people didn't mind sharing all kinds of information about themselves that they would not have shared before the rise of social media. That's quite a leap, to be sure, but at the moment, it may have been a logical leap to make. There was no alternative in the market or a voice in the marketplace for an alternative solution. And it was a valid point in a lot of ways. At the time, sharing data publicly had big benefits for both parties in the transaction. Providers and marketers, it reduced a lot of friction. It was fewer cases of faulty or incomplete information, fewer abandoned transactions, and more efficient use of resources. And for individuals, it reduced password fatigue. They had a uniform profile. And it was a more personalized experience. And of course, it was free of cost. But as we've all learned since, free is not entirely free. So there was a trade-off that was implicit there with what contract lawyers call consideration. To get the social media service for free, you had to give the provider what we see here. Here's a mouthful, a non-exclusive, transferable, sub-licensable, royalty-free, worldwide license to use any IP content that you post. That's a big asterisk, and it's what some call the handed-over model. Nevertheless, the arrangement worked well as a business model, and it served a lot of uses. But by 2011, we started really seeing a space within that value proposition that just didn't fit. This area we've sort of represented by shading in white a bit is the segment of this market where people may have used free identity solutions, but only reluctantly, or perhaps they abandoned the transaction they were working on. People didn't like things, they were seeing things they didn't like about the service. And a survey done by Gigya later on found that people resisted using social logins because they were afraid that their data were being sold or their friends would be spammed without permission. Those are the top two reasons people were not using it. So by 2011, what had been regarded largely as a micro, individual level concern about personal data and privacy, a concern that really had no commercial solution, was becoming evident as a macro, societal level problem that was creating a drag on the national economy. And now that problem has risen to the level that inspired the presidential initiative we've come to know as NSTIC. And here's just a little snippet from what President Obama's preamble said about to help us define the space that was addressed by that dominant value proposition at the time. Clearly, we're just, again, the macro view there. So moving to 2013, what might have at one time seemed to be sort of a theoretical concern about possibilities now have become our everyday reality, as Mr. Daniel was saying. That's the new normal. And this evolving social norm about sharing personal data, well, that's evolving even more. A recent article by eMarketer captured what many of us have known that's been going on for some time now. Privacy isn't dead. People just haven't had a choice, or they've just given up. There's another survey from Consumer Reports that showed in the wake of the Heartbleed bug and the revelations about it, 62% of people did nothing to enhance their privacy. Nothing. 62%. They just threw their hands up. And this graphic here also shows that it's not just one segment of the population, it's across all ages. But now the market is beginning to respond. In the past couple of months, we've seen some developments that might have seemed extraordinary just a year or two ago. Facebook, the leading consumer-facing provider of social identity, has begun developing some features that can let people control at least some of the data that is being gathered about them. At its recent F8 developer conference, Facebook detailed a new feature that's in beta for Facebook Connect that allows people to log into an app without surrendering their social graph and related information. And here's the headline straight from the New York Times. Facebook to let users limit data revealed by logins. Wow, who'd have thought? It's also worth taking a moment to read Mark Zuckerberg's quote from the article. He said, "We need to do everything we can to put people first and give people the tools they need to sign in and trust your apps." It's breathtaking on a couple of levels. One is sort of the audacity implication. App developers are not to be trusted, but Facebook is? Okay. But more importantly for our purposes, this is a remarkable recognition by Facebook that there is value in giving people privacy and control. And there was a report that was put out shortly after that by Forrester analysts Fatima Kadablu and Eve Mailer. I'm sure a lot of you know them. On May 2nd, they wrote that Facebook now has, I'm quoting now has the opportunity to position itself for a wider role and new revenue as a, dare we say it, trustworthy consumer authentication, authorization, and data sharing hub. And then in just past a few weeks here, Facebook came out with another new icon, the little blue Barney-like dinosaur, and some call it the Zuckersaur, that counsels users to check their privacy settings. So what on earth is going on here? Let's go back to our universe of federated logins and single sign-ons here and see what this means. Let's think about Facebook as a proxy for social login providers of all sorts. What we see today is that Facebook has recognized that there is a hole in its value proposition, and it has concluded that the hole is real and that it's worrisome. That space is represented here by the white oval, the space where many of us in this room live or want to live, whether it's in Common, FICAM, or any other NSTIC observant framework. So Facebook is taking strong, deliberate action to claim all the territory that it can within its existing business model, trying to position itself to become more things to more people with a new value proposition that tries to straddle the chasm between the demands of its business model and the demands of its users for greater security and privacy. Make no mistake, Facebook's steps to address privacy and security, even if not fully deployed, and even if only to pay lip service to consumer concerns, are a clear validation of the work of IDSG and its members. So take just a moment and feel good about that. Nice, huh? And here's what the landscape looks like today. Even as the pie grows, Facebook clearly intends to grow its share of that pie, and this is part of how it's going to do it with this new value proposition. So now you might ask, where does this leave IDSG? So going into 2015, we have a clear choice. Our value proposition can be defined for us, as is the case today. We can be the brand name for other, as we are now, and be limited by the offerings of other actors and the market space they leave behind. Or we can push back and we can try to claim the territory that others might try to claim with a blue cartoon dinosaur. And so lastly, this is our space, and this is the white space that was on the previous slide. We have, there's a big value proposition for us to help define, and also there are a lot of other smaller value propositions for a lot of the people in this room. So this is our challenge, is to fill the space and to define it clearly in a way that makes the most of that space that's available to us. And with that, I think we have time for questions or remarks or comments. So,
What does everybody think? You know, who wants to chime in? Jack?
this one?
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is, for social login, reality is I've got one of each. I've got a Facebook account, I've got a Google account, I've got a LinkedIn account, I got a Twitter account, I don't have a Yahoo account. What I think we want to be thinking about is it isn't an either or sort of question. It isn't going to be that as we think about the value proposition, well, we're competing against Facebook or Google or this or that. What we have to be thinking about is how do we bring additional value into the identity ecosystem. And that was sort of the comments that we heard early on. What I want to be able to do is I'm going to probably use my LinkedIn if it's going to be around professional sorts of activities that are there. I feel more comfortable with that. I may want to do certain things at low-level social areas that would be there, where I would pull in my friends or other things from a Facebook or a Google contacts list. But for other kinds of transactions, I'm not going to want to be connecting those sorts of things in. And so I think we have an opportunity that's there because we are a bit more of a blank slate. Now, hopefully, it isn't about accounts. It's about whatever we produce. Facebook ought to be able to take what we're doing, join in, and leverage that if it has value. Google would be doing the same thing, enterprises. And so, to me, we're not competing against social logins. We're creating something that if we do it right, Facebook will say, oh, this is a great way to make more money, and we'll think of a way to be leveraging that technology and coming up with new applications that we had never even thought of to sort of get this moving. So that's my take.
I couldn't agree more, and maybe this is actually the slide that I would like to refer back to. Jack, I think what I'm saying here is that the Facebook or Google, everybody else, it's not that they're competing. What I'm saying is they see value in the space that we're occupying, and they're pushing in from the outside. They're trying to claim as much of that space as they can within their business model. So I think what we're saying is that's a validation of what we're doing here, and they're trying to get as much of that space as we can. So I mean, I think I'm agreeing with you, but maybe this is the right slide to agree with you with.
Well, and I think that we will have done our work if we create a value proposition that allows me not to be tied forever to a particular type of entity. What I want is choice. I think that is one of the fundamentals of American capitalism, is that you want to allow new entrants and new ways to be coming forth so that you're not locked in certain ways. And if we do our job correctly, we will have enabled competition and choice from a variety of players to be able to come in and take advantage of what we're creating.
Thank you. Can everybody please just make sure to introduce themselves? I think Adrian.
Hi, Adrian Gropper. I think we're facing a choice to the extent we want to be clear with ourselves and with our audience as to whether we are selling our proposition to institutions, as one of the pilots discussants yesterday made very clear, what's the value to the relying party, look at it from their perspective if you want to get ahead, or whether our value proposition is to the consumer in terms of privacy, for example. And to the extent that we are living, that we're trying to simultaneously tag ourselves with these two relatively very different perspectives, we might be confusing them both. I don't have a solution, but that's kind of what your presentation very clearly brings out to me this morning.
I just wanted to also add that I like this picture because I don't think that the IDSG has to be in that white circle or oval. I think that we have the opportunity to help it be the bigger blue oval from the standpoint that security and privacy enhancing doesn't have to be all at like level 4, right? There's going to be different levels. What we hope is that the entire identity ecosystem shifts so that security should be a no-brainer, right? It should be, even if I'm doing a level 1 completely anonymous transaction, we still have security built in. And so we want to try to raise the bar and have, with, as Jeremy says, the tools and the rules to help the broader ecosystem adopt a lot of the core principles that IDSG has built itself on from the INSTIC initiatives.
Hi, this is Neville Pattinson. So first of all, the chart you've got here are usually, I would all consider them as level 1, username and password material. So the assets they're trying to protect are pretty, low value in terms of the individual consumer. These are also huge corporations, got a lot of money, a lot more money than we have, and they are providing a service and clearly manipulating that service to try to address the privacy concerns. But what I think is missing here is the value proposition for the consumer with what Michael Daniel just talked about. What are we doing for enhancing e-government activity? This stuff is great for social interaction and potentially it will go into a commercial environment, but we have a strong need to provide e-government services to the citizen. How can they protect things like their taxes? How can they submit their taxes without people already putting in false returns, etc., ahead of them electronically? So there's a value proposition here for the citizen, for the consumer, citizen, whichever way you want to look at it, that they can take on something more than a level 1, something which is level 2, 3, or whatever, for that could help them then interact with the government at a more trusted level. To think that a Facebook profile or a Google account is going to help me file my taxes, that's a bit of a stretch of my imagination right now when they're only using level 1. So if we can show IDSG, and I like what you said, Kim, about it's covering the whole slide. We need to provide the tools and the value proposition to show, okay, here you can live at this level for this type of activity, for social interaction, maybe commercial transactions. But when you want to do something of a much higher trust level, where the assets are more valuable in terms of the protection, then you need to follow these guidelines, these rules. Let's make sure that we've now got a higher level of assurance in this credential space that can now interact with the government for that particular activity. And that, to me, touches every citizen. This touches people that play with the social media and that kind of thing. If you want to do something of a higher value, but at the government level, perhaps then commerce will say, well, this is pretty cool. There's much less risk now in taking that higher level assurance transaction and identity proof rather than spending time with a low-level single factor. So for me, two-factor is something that's missing here, and then the value proposition to the citizen and the e-government service.
So we all have comments. So I totally agree. We're not, it is not the intent to disregard that. But I think there is a valid point that even impacts, Neville, some of your perspective there, in that the social providers are moving more into our space and potentially moving to higher level, finding the need to move to higher level assurance transactions. And we totally agree and understand the needs for e-government services and such, and we're not trying to discount that, but this is a pretty significant implication on the opportunity and the value proposition of the IDSG, and we need to accommodate all of that. In fact, as we were developing this, I come predominantly from the FICAM world, and I was, Jim is on one end of the spectrum, I'm on the other end of the spectrum, and we were really trying to bring both perspectives into it. Obviously, it's dominated by the consumer perspective here, but we wanted to make the point that there is commonality, and this is we feel an important implication even on potentially moving up to higher value assurance, credentials and transactions.
Thank you, Neil. And I do want to agree entirely. In fact, I sort of blew through my presentation here so we could have this conversation. I sort of made this in white. This is a space that the socialists can't get into. I mean, that's why I've sort of created this hole here. And that's where I think about FICAM being in here and those sorts of things. The higher security things. But this was intended to represent sort of single sign-on as available to consumers right now. So If you want to register at the AARP site and you don't want to use a username and password, you've got 6 choices, and they're all basically, the 3 of them are listed here, and the other 3 are exactly the same model. There's no place for our members to go in that white space right now. And what I'm suggesting is that that's where we really need to firm up our value proposition, and that's why I'm here from AARP, is to help us define that space. So I couldn't agree more, and so thank you for bringing that to our attention. But I do see it also as a level 3 area or above in that white space right there. So thank you.
Great. Just unfortunate they picked the blue dinosaur for Facebook. It's kind of a privacy dinosaur, so very fitting, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this picture should be able to represent all levels of assurance. I mean, I'm just using that term generically. I'm not trying to focus on any particular policy that's using an LOA. But this should be able to represent every type of login concept. And it's really interesting. I just came back from a couple of different conferences that were held in London last week, which is where I think I got sick. But the conversation about using social logins for government benefit access is happening in other places. Now, whether it actually takes off or is decided to be used is a different issue, but they've been trialing the use of different types of logins to ease the burden of the individual trying to access government resources and government services. So again, I think that this picture could, if we stretch our imagination, reflect all of the different forms of login use. And what we need to figure out is how do we get the wording around those value propositions that you're all starting to think about even more, and how it impacts your committee activities. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Jim Fenton. I have 2 different sorts of comments about this. One is, and I'll pick on Facebook. I hope nobody's offended about that right now. But one of the aspects of the change in the Facebook policy, that the Facebook login will no longer always be sharing the social graph, is that was not something that users typically understood at all, that Facebook was sharing that information. It's kind of, actually, I was kind of surprised by that Facebook would actually come out and publicly say, hey, we've been sharing your social graph, and we're going to stop doing that. So I think one of the challenges for us is helping people understand what the problems are with the existing things that they're using. They don't understand all of the, and of course these other players have much bigger budgets than we do for PR and that sort of thing, and so it's an uphill battle. But we still have people. We're supposed to think, hey, yeah, Facebook is helping protect our privacy, but of course Facebook is still collecting the same information that they're collecting. They're just not sharing it with the third-party applications, and but we don't know how Facebook is using that information, or whatever that they're sharing with. So that was one topic that I had. The other is a little bit of a reaction to some of the comments that I'm hearing in the room here, and I think I'm agreeing the most with Kim about the need to support all levels of assurance. I'm concerned about a trend that I seem to be seeing I feel like I'm seeing in IDESG, that we're turning into the identity ecosystem for high-value transactions. Users, if you look at a typical user, a typical member of the public, across a day, they may log into 20 different things. And if you count the number of logins that would be suitable for, appropriate for 2-level authentication versus the things that they do that are all very casual, I think you'll find that the great number of transactions, the perceived value that we have for consumers has a lot more to do with how much are we making their life simpler in terms of the things that they do all the time, every day. yes, and we've got, I think, a unique capability here to support the higher levels as well. But I want to make sure that we don't forget about the lower levels in the process, because otherwise we're going to confine ourselves to that white bubble.
Thank you, Jim. I think most of us fully agree that the IDSG has to represent the entire sphere, I'm trying not to use ecosystem, the world of identity transactions, and that if we don't, we will not fulfill the opportunity, will not meet the challenge, and potentially not, survive. I think there's a lot of people, I believe that. So you make a very good point, but at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that some of the higher value transactions are sort of leading the curve, pushing the curve, driving adoption, at least initially. And we have to find that balance to accomplish the large vision. And that's one of the challenges I was essentially referring to earlier on that we have to work through.
The main risk that I see is making sure that we fulfill the ease of use need for the lower value transactions.
So, Jamie?
Good morning. I'm Jamie Clark from Oasis. First of all, Adam and Jim, thanks very much for this. It's good stuff. And I'm glad we're on the Value Proposition 2015 chart. And by the way, this slide deck is not currently on the agenda site, but it will be, right?
Yes.
Okay, so people can find it there if they're getting this after the fact. I think the IDSG risks allowing itself to be cornered into too small a corral here. It's easy to look at that map and see, the little center as being high value LOA4 and the marginal lighter gray area as being, a little higher level of assurance, and then having the big oval of all the worlds of transactions being LOA0 or LOA1. That's an easy view. It's also a wrong view. I'm not going to comment on the behavior of any particular company, and I think we need to be careful to not build a tent that it makes it impossible for even the largest organizations out there doing social work today to not come into the tent. So we need to be a little more careful with our rhetoric here, in my view. Having said that, I view that large oval as being the entire world of transactions, as Kim said, that we could possibly be involved with. And in my take, the best proposition for the IDSG probably is to be able to make privacy enhancing real and push it outwards into that larger set of transactions. There will always be high value transactions that require a high level of security, and nobody's going to use a social login for that unless they mutate into something radically different than they are today. But that's just the turf you get for federated identity without trying. There are governmental departments within the United States over the last 3 years during the incubation of this NSTIC and IDSG program that showed up and said, we'd like to use X social login for signing in for government services at a low value. So, are we already there? Yes. In fact, some of the NPO folks spend a certain amount of their time going around and beating those issues back with a stick and telling them to hold on and wait and explaining the White House strategy to them. So, we're already facing that problem. And I just want to leave you with this thought. If we can define privacy enhancing better so that we know how it is designed, so that we know what kind of privacy by design work needs to happen in order for it to be assured, so that we have easy consumable understanding of those values along the lines of what Denise Taylor in one of the pilots Prevo was talking about the other day, with simple icons that say, this means that your stuff won't be shared with somebody else, and this means we'll only use it for some certain services. In other words, if we can get those promises about privacy enhancing beaten down to a more widely usable, common, understandable value proposition, then that gives the marketplace, including low value transactions, the opportunity to want that, at which point open federated identity, usable by everybody, is competing for the whole oval. And it's not a coincidence that the chairman of your privacy committee is standing behind me.
No, I hope you all don't think that I'm being a bobblehead up here, but I just can't stop shaking my head and agreeing, because everything that everyone's saying is completely valid. The goal of today is to really spark that conversation, and I would love if we all could walk out with an agreement of the general set of value propositions that we're going to, work on. And after we take our break in about 15 minutes, so there's still plenty of time for more conversations and comments. But in about 15 minutes, we're going to take a break, get a breather, and then Andrew Hughes and Kalia Hamlin have put together an interactive session for us to document this information, because we don't want to lose these valuable comments that all of you are making. So I really appreciate the level of engagement in this process, and there's going to be more to come. And the goal would be, how can we make this picture truly represent what all of you are saying?
I believe Stuart was next over here.
Stuart Shapiro. I think my comments are going to overlap to a certain extent with several that have already been made, but that's probably a good sign because it means there's a certain convergence happening. I was really struck yesterday during the pilot presentations by, in particular by the ID.me presentation. No, I do not hold any kind of stake in ID.me. This is an endorsement. But I was really struck by the example of the discount from the e-tailer, okay? Precisely because I thought it was just so prosaic, okay? I can get a discount because I have a certain status. The seller wants to confirm or verify that I actually do have that status, and here's a way that that they can verify that without me having to provide them with a bunch of information, answer a bunch of intrusive questions, what have you. That's an incredibly powerful and relatable proposition, and it's part of the larger answer to the question which I think a lot of people outside this room are inclined to ask, which is, well, why should I want one of these things? Or why should I want to participate in this? What's it going to do for me? I think because we're all steeped in this stuff to one extent or another, we tend to talk in terms of abstractions, or we tend to talk in terms of very specific lingo. Even just stuff like, low value versus high level transactions. Well, regular people don't think in terms of low value versus high value transactions. I think kind of tacitly, implicitly, they probably think in those terms, where some transactions they're more concerned about than others because they feel more sensitive than others, but they certainly, I don't think they think explicitly in those terms. And so, to the extent that I have a suggestion or a recommendation, I think it's to try to focus more on building a value proposition from the bottom up, as opposed to from the top down. Another part of this, or related to that, I'll go back to the pilots, the pilot presentations again. One of the others, I forget which one it was, they were talking about the difficulty they had trying to make presumably fairly high-level people at Fidelity understand how this works. I was just really struck by that. Presumably these are pretty intelligent people, but they harbored misconceptions that persisted a pretty long time. So if they're having trouble getting this, most people are going to have trouble getting this, even if they're using, federated credentials, even if they're using their Facebook credentials to log in to something else, once again, they're not going to think of it in the terms that we think of it. For them, it's just, I get to use my Facebook ID and password in order to get into this other site. And so I really think it behooves us to think more and more deeply about a value proposition that goes from the bottom up, where we come up with bits and pieces of this which most people can kind of, which will resonate kind of intuitively almost with most people, because to the extent that we're talking about low and high value transactions and levels of assurance and relying parties and all this kind of stuff, people are just going to tune it out because they're not used to thinking in those terms, and quite frankly, why should they be thinking in those terms?
Thank you. And if you think about also that citizen consumer panel that we had this yesterday, a lot of them don't have even a focus around identity, and trying to figure out how to get engaged is difficult for them. So if we could have planted you, Stuart, to make those comments, it wouldn't have been any better, because that's exactly what that activity is going to be like after our break, where we're going to try to get those bottom level, the true narrow value propositions that should be in the language that people can relate to, and have those help us build upward. So perfect.
Yeah,
I might want to make one little plug to the remote participants. We are monitoring any of the chat areas. So if you have any comments or questions, please don't feel like we're leaving you out. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Sorry, Adrian, could I just put in one plug over here? Andrew Hughes, please come back right on time after the break, because we are going to try a technique with the group to get those real words out of you for the real value propositions. So I've heard from most of the speakers that we're talking in our own jargon, our own lingo. The exercise is intended to have you help us get out of that problem. So it'll be up to you. Sorry.
Absolutely. There will be more time for this discussion, so we have about 5 more minutes. We'll have a few more if we could try and get through all the other commenters here. Over here.
So keep it
Yeah.
Adrian Gropper. I think the diagram on the screen is a bit of misdirection that needs to be corrected. There are two. There's a class of identity providers in the form of Apple or Verizon, let's say, by example, that are selling services direct to consumers that are in a position to cross the LOA 1 to 4 even boundaries if they want to. And so, looking at the value issue simply as free or not free is not sufficient in my opinion, because we have these kinds of consumer companies that are selling directly to consumers. They're not free, and they're competing with each other for this, for this kind of capability that we have to consider.
Thank you. And I would say that I think that it is the diagram is incomplete, and that there's lots more that can be added to it. So thank you very much for your comments.
Over here.
Yeah, in terms of what can be added to it.
Your name?
Ken Klingenstein. There's a layering on top of this of attributes and informed consent mechanisms, et cetera. I've been concerned that the emphasis has been on login, and all of the excitement happens after login when attributes get passed to the relying party. That's where privacy gets managed. That's where access control gets managed. So where IDESG can come in is a consistency of layering on top of this in terms of the attributes, in terms of the structures of informed consent, et cetera, so that we can educate and move the populace along in this process. But it isn't the act of authentication, it's what happens afterwards that is really the excitement.
Thank you, Ken. I think that Dave Cox is going to be the other one would totally agree with you.
Hi, I'm Dave Cox. Great presentations. One of the questions I saw that I'm not sure we're addressing is who is our customer? And IDSG is the customer. This constituency here, which involves government agencies, telcos, software vendors, people that are privacy experts, are the customer. And I think this is more of a strategy as opposed to, the actual value proposition. Because why are we here? That's the question I want to answer. If I'm coming here, there's a reason. I want more business, I want to make contacts, I want to sell something, or I want to move something in the market space. Those statements there are more, are not really a value proposition to me. I really want to contribute to those happening, but why am I here is the question I ask you.
That's we're going to take the next hour and a half to.
That's right. That's exactly right. So that's why we're going to have that interactive exercise so we can actually develop those.
Oh, hi. I'm
One more over here.
Tim McKay with Kaiser Permanente. Part of my day job is doing this. So taking general principles and turning them into business cases so that we can get funding for them, including for identity products. So invariably, in order to do that, there's a need to move from general principles to specific business requirements, ideally to show model workflows, and then from there to show that there's a structure that can be achieved by engineering within a reasonable cost and time. So to what extent have we considered or have produced a type of model system where we can literally size the value proposition and be able to sell it more generally?
So we're fairly early in actually getting that value proposition portion together, which is why we're having this conversation, because what we see is that we keep starting kind of over and over in that part of it. So that's been the hard part, to really kind of narrow it. I'm glad you're here. If that's your expertise, we need you. But, you know, there's a lot of people out here that have made some great comments today. We're going to capture all of those in the next activity and really try to make this meaningful so that we can.
There's a couple online questions.
Oh, good. Okay. So that we can get those well documented and made so that we can get more people to join us, as well as people to understand exactly what we are and are not. Kalia?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm one of the folks leading the next exercise, and I just wanted to get you all ready. We're going to ask you to close your laptops. Yes, when we're doing the exercise.
After the break.
After a break. And I'd like you to all, when you come back from break, sit beside somebody you don't know, because you're going to talk to them in pairs. So.
Okay, so we have a couple of comments online that we want to capture, and then we're going to break. So, online comments or questions? 1 second.
Here's a comment from Russell Chung. The blue oval is labeled the universe of federated social SSO logins. I believe that the ecosystem consists of many blue ovals with a diverse array of frameworks and levels of assurance, and that the IDESG should be a white oval in each of them. The value of IDESG is that we will provide interoperability so that users, IDPs, and relying parties in one ecosystem can interoperate in a secure, trustworthy, and privacy-enhancing manner. This is from Russell Chung, a comment.
Thank you, Russell. You know, what this whole effort reminds me of is last year, or maybe it was the year before, Kalia and a few of us worked on a holistic pictures effort where we're trying to capture all the different images, but the work that Jim and Adam did to kind of get us started, I think is fabulous, because it's allowing us to take a picture and figure out how to modify it to really represent what we think that we are and what we should be doing and what the identity ecosystem really is. So thank you, Russell. I think that we definitely need to make modifications, but we now have at least an image that we all can rally around and figure out what the real image should be.
Okay, here's a comment from, well, it's either a comment or a question, not sure, from Anne Raquia Robbins. Going forward, we need to discuss the fact that relying parties and their service providers are monetizing individuals' human attribute, question mark.
Yes. I mean, there are business models where companies make money on attributes. LexisNexis is one of them. But no, I mean, from that standpoint that we're not actually capturing, but I mean, there are lots of business models that are going to exist. There are going to be free models. There are going to be ad-based models. There are going to be models where people hold on to their own personal data, like the personal data ecosystems that exist. And I think we have to figure out how all of those scenarios work within the broader ecosystem. So thank you.
Okay, another question from Anne Rukia Robbins. Are the giveaways comparable to the money being made by the relying parties?
Can you repeat that one again?
Okay, are the giveaways comparable to the money being made by the relying parties?
Are the giveaways comparable to the
money
being given
being made by the relying parties?
I don't know how to answer that one. I think the whole conversation about the value of an identity transaction is a very broad, topic. There's things about people, the willingness for you to actually share your information, the cost of the transaction, things that are verifiable, things that are not verified. I mean, I don't know where to go with that one.
As a relying party, I'll take that too. Basically, we're making zero right now. So I don't know what the giveaways are making. I mean, obviously it's a lot, but the reason we're here is we see this as potentially a part of the bigger AARP value proposition. So we can bear some of those costs that are associated with issuing identity or being a relying party, and for a while, we can just bear those costs and hopefully show our members, where this is all going and how it makes their life better. So if there's any way to get some revenue out of that, we don't know yet. That's what we have to figure out. But we're in a position where we can make it part of a broader value proposition, so we don't have to have anything. But again, right now, the answer is zero.
Okay. Well, here's a clarification. Andrew K. Robbins, I don't know if it's going to change your answer, but basically she's referring to giveaways as coupons and discounts.
Okay. I mean, I still think that's, I think Jeremy actually has a comment.
Let's end with Jeremy. How's that?
Yeah.
You're not on.
Not yet.
Now it's on. Perfect. Too short. I'm too tall. Thing's too short. One of the ideas that's sort of implicit in NSTIC is that personal data does have value, tremendous value. And I think, as you guys have very nicely illustrated on these slides, one of the problems in the ecosystem today is a lot of people's information is being collected, shared, swapped, sold, analyzed without giving individuals any say in that. And one of the premises that's at the deep in NSTIC, and really I think is key to the value proposition, is there is more value to be unlocked in the economy by giving consumers more control over what elements of their data, what attributes are actually shared in different transactions. And by giving them the ability to have more control, more of a say in it, there will be more value both for them as consumers as well as for the relying parties who they're doing business with. Now, what that particular model is and who makes a nickel or a penny here or there is something for the marketplace to figure out, but there's a key effort here to try and shift the equation, both to put some default controls in place in the ecosystem in terms of some basic rights that consumers should have when they're engaging in identity transactions, but also there's a very important line in NSTIC which says, while these are the default behaviors, nothing should preclude consumers from choosing, should they choose, to share some of their data in order to get other benefits. And I think this is one of the issues that's really at the heart of, where is the value proposition in this evolving identity ecosystem. Some of our pilots have certainly, they're experimenting right now with different business models, and we're hopeful that a few of them prove viable. They need to for this all to work.
Thank you. So we are over our time. I really appreciate the conversations that we've had so far, and I look forward to hearing these micro value propositions that we're going to work on next. This is an activity that can work with the remote participants as well, so please stay tuned as the rules, I shouldn't say rules, the guidelines as to how we're using this process play. So it is 10:07 and 22, 23, 24 seconds. And we are supposed to start back at 10:15. I know if you're going to try to run to grab some coffee or something, you might need a little more time. So I am so sorry, Andrew and Kalia, but let's go ahead and take 15 full minutes so that you have a little time. So we'll start back at like 10:22. So please come back on time. Thank you.
Thank
Can you please take your seats? Remember, this is an interactive exercise. You will be required to talk to other people. Folks remotely, please use the chat window. We're capturing and trying to monitor as best as we can. And there will be some email instructions for you as well on how to submit email comments. What we're trying to do a bit of a crowdsourcing to give us enough material for forming up more concrete value propositions as we heard the need for in the previous session. Where's this one? There we go. Okay, so why are we here? One of the challenges we have with value proposition is it's a very abstract concept for most people. It's hard to project into a situation that is not a personal experience or a situation you've been in before, which is usually what happens when we try to generate value propositions. Very hard to do. So what we're going to try to do with this exercise is use a technique, which Clea will get into as we get further on, to try to start internalizing what the future value of IDSG will mean to you and your communities and your organizations. Okay? We need you to not think about IDSG as it is today. We need you to not think about the world as it is today. Think about IDSG in its future state when it's all running, everything's going smoothly, participants are participating, there's more trust and confidence in the online world, everyone's at the table because they want to be here. Think of that state. Because if we make our value proposition about today's value that we're going to make, we will end in about 6 months because we'll achieve our goal too soon and not achieve the end state vision. So cast your mind forward. This is a roaring success. Okay? We've got thousands of people remotely online participating here. And think of what the world would be like with an IDSG that is behaving the way that you want it to behave. Because as Dave Cox mentioned in his comments, we are the consumers of IDSG, and the people that we represent, or the groups that we come from, are one of the values. Don't use that one in the exercise, but it's one of the values of an IDSG type of organization. Okay? So, cast your mind forward. Just a quick note before I hand it off to Clea. So we need you to work in pairs. So if you're not sitting beside someone now, you might want to move so you don't have to move later. Instructions will be on the various colored sheets of handouts. I've got a few runners that will help distribute and collect the pieces of paper. Get a writing implement handy, or pass us your iPads when you're done. Your choice. We really need you to focus on your direct experience. Don't imagine what it's like for someone else. We do that all the time. That's how we get the vague statements of, yeah, we think it should be okay for them because some reason that we make up. We want you to answer the questions and you to think about your situation, your company's situation, how your organization will value IDSG in the future. This is how we get the pragmatic, concrete statements of value. You have to do it. Sorry, it's a little bit of work, but you have to do it. Okay, and online, we'll try to work with online. Any questions, please go through the chat, and we'll figure it out. Okay.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. My name's Kalia, also known as Identity Woman, and I'm actually on the Management Council as the representative of small businesses and entrepreneurs. So I have another life. I also design and facilitate interactive conferences, so we are taking the next hour to interact and do something that we'll hope will get to a great value proposition. So, as Andrew said, we want you to think into the future. IDC is running and working. What's it going to do for you? And we would like you to discuss with your neighbor and tell a story about how the IDSG could make a positive difference to your organization. So if you're here representing a company, think about your company and its clients and its customers. What is the IDSG going to do for you? And you're going to have 10 minutes, so it's about 5 minutes each to share that with each other. And then we're going to hand out a sheet of paper and ask you to write down the answer. And another frame that we came up for this is, what role would the IDSG have to assume? Or what program would it need to govern? Or what product would it need to produce to be giving you that positive benefit in the future? So 10 minutes, discuss, and then I will give you the second exercise within part 1. So get with somebody you don't know. So Adam, you can go find someone. Everybody pair up. And yes, and we'll hand you the papers right now. For those of you online, you can see the slides. You can join a conversation in the chat room and with all the folks who are online, and you can also email your answers and we'll collect them all and use them.
Do you have a partner yet?
And folks, in the discussion part of this, we'd like you to tell your partner your story. So focus the discussion on your background, your story, your experience. Got a couple more minutes, folks, so please try to capture and start wrapping up the conversation, or the start of the conversation, I guess.
Okay. Please start writing down the answers that you have to the question. And remember, we want you to have your organization hat on. We'll get to the citizen you in the next part. But focus on you as an organization and your professional role and your company's interest in being here and their clients and customers. So please write down the answer to the question now so we can do the next piece. Okay, do folks need more time or should we go on? 1 more minute, okay. So now that you have that written down, we're going to ask you to work with it some more. And, oh, he's got them. We would like you to synthesize what you just articulated, and we have you in pairs for a reason, so you can talk about how you do that, into this type of statement. With what you just articulated, in the future, Party X has the increased ability to do or greater confidence in doing activity Y because of the IDSG. So based on what you just articulated, we want you to concretize it and explain how it helps your company or organization, or whoever Party X is, perhaps it's the client or customer of your organization, do activity X. And we would like you to all articulate at least one of those, but you can articulate more of them. So we want you to talk to your neighbor. We are giving you, again, 10 minutes to do this. So discuss this and then write it down. So talk amongst yourselves. So this is getting to what can you do? Getting really concrete. With the folks online, we really encourage you to chat in the window and talk about your answers, because folks here are chatting amongst themselves. So. Okay, start writing down those, what we're calling micro value propositions. Party X has the increased ability or confidence to do activity Y because of the IDSG. And this is obviously relating what you wrote on the pink sheet of paper to concretizing it and explaining it in more everyday language. How's it going to benefit folks? And stick with the organizational experience for your organization.
Some of you commented that the nature of the exercise is maybe a little too broad in scope. So narrow the scope. So if it's about a specific aspect of IDSG in the future, use that. Just set the context within what you write down, and we'll decipher it when we do the processing. Oh, and as many statements as you can get. We're looking for data points.
Okay, how are folks doing? Good. Still writing, okay. Okay, I'm hearing the noise level go up, so I'm going to assume more of you are finished writing. I would like your attention. Thanks. Okay, so now we want you to cluster into groups of 6. So if if Jeremy and his pair and you two can come up and be with these folks, so we just spread out around the auditorium, We're going to ask you to share what you just wrote with your group of 6. So find another set of 2 pairs. Some of you are already clustered close enough to do that, but some of you will have to get up and move. And we would like you to share with each other what you wrote, and then we want you to, on a blue sheet of paper, write a big value proposition. Yes. So be in groups of 6. If you are in a group of 4, it's okay. But you need to be in more than just your pair. Don't be in 8, that's too big. 4, 6. Share your statements that you wrote on your orange sheet of paper, not your pink sheet. We're sticking with the value proposition. Share your micro value propositions that you came up with on your orange sheet, and then see if you can work together and on a blue sheet of paper write something that's a bigger value proposition. And you have 5 minutes, maybe a little more. Okay, how are we doing on the blue synthesis? Yes. You can. Okay, one more minute, and then I'm going to come around and hear all of the things you wrote on the blue sheet of paper. Okay, we're going to give you one more minute. Please write a big value proposition together. Okay. I'm going to now ask this group at the back to share their value proposition. So, Deb, you're reading.
Hi, my name is Mark Signorino. In the future, relying parties have the ability to interact with consumers in a trusted manner that both protects consumer privacy while allowing responsible relying parties, industry, e-commerce, to expand, thrive, and flourish.
Excellent. This group.
It's a really complicated world out there for users. Nobody really knows exactly the lexicon we're using and everything that goes on in the background behind what we're envisioning. So I think one of the things we all agreed on was how can we as an organization develop a kind of a uniform protocol, and Steve referred to it as a cigarette pack label, but I think of it as something more than that. It would be essentially rules of the road for this federated identity ecosystem that we're envisioning.
So we kind of came down on a couple of themes that are very familiar to this organization. The basics, two-sentence description is that the IDSG needs to provide confidence in online transactions by improving security, privacy, cost efficiency, and accessibility. So I mean, these are very core end state principles that I think we're kind of keep coming back to because that's what brought us all together in the first place. We said that this would be realized when individuals and organizations recognize the IDESG as a symbol of trust. And so whether that's done through a trust mark or a validation system of some other or certification method, whatever the method is, going back to those guiding principles and being seen as the sort of bearer of trust of those things is the key.
And folks, keep writing. So as you hear these, reflect on them, update, keep going.
Yours.
Two things. IDSG certification makes trust easier for consumers to understand. And the second is IDSG logo must stand for better and result in better interoperability.
The other thing that if I can invite the helpers to go through the audience and collect all the papers that you've just filled out, because we're going to read everything. So your orange paper, your pink paper, hand them in. And we'll hear this group.
The ability for individuals and organizations to have an increased ability to do private, secure, efficient, easy-to-use, interoperable transactions on the internet or electronically online, and to avoid password glut. That's it.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Behrens. Our statement was relying parties have the increased confidence in trusting data or attributes provided by the federated party. As a result, society as a whole reduces risk and cost. As an example, the post office can offer change of address services for free. Currently it charges $1 for customer verification and consequently suffers a high abandonment rate.
Jack Seuss. We ended up re-articulating the NSTIC vision that we need interoperability internationally, adaptive privacy controls, flexible security, and verifiable attributes, all with the recognition of the IDSG as the recognized body to make this a reality.
So I think we had a whole list of them. It's too long to summarize in one, but I think the takeaway is the IDSG is to serve as effectively like an association that enables interaction and communication between various constituents, which would then seek their own individual value props from that. That would include identity providers who, if you bring more identity providers, they would all start coming, and that would drive the need for rallying parties to participate, and therefore you'd create an ecosystem where people are really interested in participating. The other components that we talked about, for example, is if this community, as a result of those interactions, can ultimately make identity online the equivalent of digital dial tone, so that we don't really worry about those things, which the implication of that is that we have the NSTIC principles embedded in, particularly, how we deal with privacy. The mechanism by which we would can make that happen would be a series of trust marks, some of which would be voluntary, but that would be interoperable, pretty much like the GTRI pilot. Was there anything else I missed?
Great. Can you give me those? Yes. We're going to read them all. Seriously, if you have sheets you've written, we'd very much like them from you. Okay, next.
Sorry, Clea?
Yes.
I'll just try to filter some of the online ones.
Please.
Folks online, thank you for putting them in the chat. I'm not going to read them all. I'll read the ones that are right here. From Brian Russell, the shadow image of what we're asking. So consumer confidence is the driving force behind any consumer-driven ecosystem. At the point where consumers lose confidence, the IDSG loses its value, right? So that's good pairing there. Chelsea Owens, federal statistical agencies have the increased ability to do or confidence in doing online survey collections because of the IDSG, and there's a rationale behind that as well.
How about one more?
Russell Chung, IDSG would publish the best practices for the operation of an identity ecosystem that would result in security, trustworthiness, and privacy.
And there's one more group at the back we didn't get. Here we go.
Okay, confidence of users, for example, large to small businesses, RPs, all levels of government bodies, associations, as well as machines and the Internet of Things, are based on, they have confidence based on the goalposts from the 8 guiding principles, and the attributes will be stored securely for all domains and they're usable by the individual owner.
Thank you. Okay. So, Andrew, can you flip it to the next slide? So, we want you to take off your industry hat now and put on your individual hat and do the same thing with someone else. So, we're actually going to merge part 1 and part 2. You just answer this as your org, and we want you to talk about this from your personal experience and get to the micro value proposition where you are the party. So how does it make your life better? We're shrinking this. We're going to have 5 minutes. So talk to someone else that you didn't pair with the first time, so you're in groups of 6. And we want you to be the party in the activity statement. Can you flip to the next one? So party X is you. I will be able to do activity Y because of the IDSG. So I'm going to hand out both parts, and I'd like you to talk with someone else for 5 minutes and get to that value proposition about the IDSG in the future for you as an individual.
And also those that you may have obligations to or care for.
Okay, how are we doing, guys? Do you have something written down about how the IDSG makes your life better in the future? Yes? Okay, now you're going to share them with more than just the pairs, but you may already have been doing that, but we'll give you 1 minute to share those with each other and see if there's something in common, and we're going to hand a blue sheet of paper, and if it makes sense, you can write down a synthesis version of what you said from your individual point of view. Yes, mix it up, but they're mixed. They're okay, they're in pods. You can move pods if you want. Talk with some new people. How does it make your life better? And can you read those to each other concisely and come up with a bigger value proposition? We're going to bring you blue paper. Okay, let's have one more minute with the light blue paper, your value proposition. I'll come around and have you read them, and then we'll have our finale question, and you'll be off for lunch.
And please, on the light blue, if you could write part 2 on the light blue ones so we can tell them apart. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to come to some groups and hear their light blue answers. Let's hear from you.
So we got to the individuals should be able to conduct online transactions without having to be authenticated by third-party social media outlets. That means the expectation of privacy and strong authentication without, quote-unquote, identifying yourself.
We have to access and conduct online services and transactions by choosing one or more credentials, no passwords, that provide more security, privacy, and confidence than today.
Excellent.
The group, the team here, looked at a transaction, kind of considering I went to the blood bank, gave blood, and I want my information back to me, sent back in a secure way, and yet there were no terms or conditions. And we think terms and conditions should be a uniform guideline or a protocol that is established so it could be adopted uniformly if it's secure data, rather than get the 8-page terms and condition, you're sending it back and you have to go to every different site. There should be a uniform protocol. So when I get my blood data back, it comes to my account with my level 4 assurance, if you will. But nonetheless, there's a uniform protocol dealing with terms and conditions.
If you define my rights and recourses regarding my identity, data, attributes, I'd feel more confident in any activity online having more full information.
Users, relying parties, identity providers, and attribute providers will have increased ability and confidence in online interactions in terms of trust, privacy, security, reliability, interoperability, and low cost.
Thank you. You didn't do one. Can one of you read one of yours? How's it going to make your life better?
Let me establish one secure identity, which I know won't be used for anything else than letting me use my secure identity.
Excellent.
Conducting online transactions with various organizations across industries without having to prove who I am. Ability to control who can see my data and what they can do with my data.
I would have increased ability to understand the everyday privacy implications of managing my online identity because of IDESG. I have increased opportunities, confidence, and control for doing online transactions because of IDESG, which allows me to have more peace of mind and make better use of my time. Basically, allows me to interact online without fear.
Ah, that's excellent. Okay. And one more. And can I invite my helpers to go and collect the yellow and green papers you've all filled out, because we really want to read all of those. Plus the blue ones people have read.
This is our group, Bob Farron speaking. I have greater trust to transact business so that every organization I interact with online has increased ability to and confidence in accepting my credentials, but only based on information I believe appropriate for the transaction, and I know the provider of the internet service is not abusing my trust due to the IDSG.
Did we miss any more here? Do you want to read one offline, Andrew? They're having a different discussion. Okay, and one more up here.
I'd like to IDSG to eliminate the need for coercive identity matching in healthcare and commerce.
Did you write that down? Excellent.
And this may be a counterpoint to that one. IDSG understands and accepts the need to balance identity considerations looking at the needs of public health and safety as well as the needs of the individual for privacy.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Any more? Okay. So with that, can you forward? So this is our grand finale. It should be easy. We want to know why you're here. So you asked this question in the earlier section, and we want to hear from you why you're here. Why did you come here to the meeting, and why are you involved in IDSG? And that will also help us in shaping our activities. And that goes on the purple sheet. That's why I handed you all out a purple sheet. So if you could write that down, hopefully it's easy because you know. Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a minute. So we're going to give you a minute, and then Kim's going to lead us into lunch. And if you're online, please feel free to share the answer to this question as well in the chat. So keep writing. Kim's going to explain what's happening at lunch. Andrew and I are going to take all of the stuff you've shared with us, both here and online, and synthesize it and share it back with you. And if you have any questions or want to connect with me, I'm actually flying back home at the end of today, so I just wanted to tell you that. So, Kim.
So I just want to take a minute and thank Jim Barnett, Adam Madlin, Andrew Hughes, and Kalia Hamlin for putting together these two components around value proposition. I think it's been really helpful. So can we just give them a hand? And thank you all for being willing to pair in twos and in sixes and online to be engaging in these conversations. All of these pieces of information that you've shared with us is going to be extremely helpful in being able to kind of get to that next step. So we're going to have to move a little quickly because we did need to go over a few minutes since we started late. But as you know, the lunchtime period for today and tomorrow includes Birds of a Feather sessions. So from 12 to 1, there's 2 Birds of a Feather today. One is in room E, and the other is in room F. Those are downstairs. E is the Privacy Trust Framework, Birds of a Feather, and F is the TSCP pilot discussion. There is no food allowed in this room. So if you go to get food and want to come back in here and don't want to go to a Birds of a Feather, you just can't come in here. So go somewhere else. But usually the Birds of Feathers are really great because you get to kind of have a very interactive session. So we're done for now. Please go grab your food, and I hope that you all join a Birds of a Feather session. Thank you.